Today we're going to talk about the Berlin Papyrus 1171-0 and its relationship to the Gospel of John. Well, let's refresh our memory a little bit from the last video. So what is Papyrus Berlin 1171-0? Well, what it is it's a set of two small gospel fragments that record an otherwise unknown conversation between Jesus and his disciple Nathaniel. I've made another video already in which I looked at the images of the manuscript and made a transcription of the Greek as well as provided a translation. So if you're interested in seeing some of those details, you can go and watch that video as well. But I'm also going to show the Greek and English text in this video as too when I make the comparison with the Gospel of John. So don't feel like you'll really be missing out too much. So the scene in this text, in this Berlin Papyrus, is reminiscent of Jesus' call to Nathaniel to be his disciple. That episode appears in the first chapter of John's Gospel. Because the texts are so similar, it would be a good idea to compare them and examine them in a critical manner. And that is the subject of today's little presentation. Okay, so here are the Greek texts in question. You can see that I've taken the Greek out of the Society of Biblical Literature Greek New Testament, which is kind of like a free resource that biblical studies students can use. You can see the reference here. It's the story of Jesus calling Nathaniel, and you can see a cute little, image of Nathaniel here. Although the icon says Bartholomew, but the tradition tends to see them as the same person. And over here you have the much smaller account of the Berlin Papyrus. And I've taken this transcription from Ehrman and Plese's 2011 book. It's like an anthology of apocryphal gospels. Anyway, so let's see what this looks like in English. So let's refresh our memory about what the Johannine story is. So the story goes like this. On the next day, he wanted to go out into Galilee. This is Jesus. And Jesus found Philip, and he said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, from the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael, and said to him, "We have found the man about whom Moses and the prophets wrote in the law, Jesus, the son of Joseph, the man from Nazareth." And Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Philip said, "Come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him, and he said of him, "Look, a true Israelite in whom there is no trickery." Nathanael said to him, "From where do you know me?" Jesus answered and said to him, "Before Philip speaking with you, I saw you under the fig tree." Nathanael answered him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered him and said, "Do you believe because I said that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see even greater things." And he said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see," I think I wrote the word 7 here. I meant to write see. "You will see the heavens open." This was supposed to say, "You will see the heavens open," and the angels of God going up and coming down to the Son of Man. Anyway, it's no big deal. Let's go on to the next text here. Sorry about my little typos. The Berlin Papyrus says this. So there's a gap in the text that's unclear, and then it says, "And he said, 'Rabbi, Lord, you are the Son of God.'" Sound familiar, right? The rabbi answered and said to him, "Nathanael, walk in the sun." Nathanael answered and said to him, "Rabbi, Lord, you are the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world." The rabbi answered and said to him, then it's blank, we don't know what it is, and then the next little page says Jesus Christ God in Coptic instead of Greek. But all the rest of this is in Greek. Okay, so what are the initial comments here? So the similarities should be evident from the comparison. We've pointed out a few of them. And all that is left to do now is to list the similarities and the differences between the two texts. And then this analysis will help us to discern whether this Berlin Papyrus is directly dependent on John's Gospel, or, and if it's expanding upon the text in some way, if it's expanding upon the Johannine story. So let's start with the similarities. We can see that both in each text, both Jesus and Nathanael are mentioned, I have another typo here, are mentioned in each text in the same teacher-disciple relationship. Then the next thing we have is that the wording is similar. So for example, in this particular set, we have an 80% of verbal agreement, where 4 out of the 5 words are exactly the same. John's Gospel says, Apocryphe Jesus kai epenauto. right? Or if you like classical pronunciation, autoi. That's not how they said it at this time period. But in any case, then in the Berlin Papyrus, we have Apocryphe auto ho rabis kai apen. So even though the word order is different, the actual words match. 80% of the words are the same. And then, of course, both texts place the following confession on Nathaniel's lips. You are the Son of God. Both texts say exactly this, the same confession. So what about the differences? Well, in John's Gospel, Jesus makes predictions about what Nathaniel will see. And that's the point of the story. But in the Berlin Papyrus, Jesus makes didactic or imperative statements to Nathaniel in response to his Christological confessions. Jesus teaches Nathaniel things and he tells him to do things. That's how the Berlin Papyrus works. So here's another difference. In John's Gospel, the affirmation that Jesus is the Lamb of God is placed upon the lips of John the Baptist. But in the Berlin Papyrus, that affirmation is placed on Nathaniel's lips specifically. And it's very interesting to think about why. So the only statement that is not explicit in John's Gospel is Jesus' command to walk in the sun. Those exact words show up in the Berlin Papyrus, but the phrase, the command to walk in the sun, is not explicitly in John's Gospel. So those are the differences. So, having looked at that, what is the relationship between the texts? Well, there are two options to explain the similarities and differences. One is that the author of the source behind this papyrus knew John's Gospel and used it, and just took content from it and went with it. So the second option is that the author knew independent traditions related to John's Gospel, and that's where the similarities come from, as well as the differences. Then the third option is that the author knew John's Gospel but chose to use independent sources. Now this third one, we wouldn't really know if it's actually true, because we don't have the tools to know what the author was reading or what was in his mind at the time. But it is something that in theory could be possible, even though we can't really prove it if it is true. Okay, so I personally, from my little survey of the evidence, I tend to prefer the first option for a few reasons. And this is the option that the person who wrote the source behind the Berlin Papyrus actually used the text of John's Gospel. So the first reason is that this high degree of verbal agreement would suggest literary dependence. It's hard to get around that when the words are exactly the same. Then that suggests that the author used the source and looked at it directly. So the second reason is the fact that the papyrus is from the 6th century. Okay, so even if the source from behind the papyrus is, 300 or 400 years before this papyrus was written, which might not be likely, it's still written after the time that John became popular, because John's Gospel became popular by the mid-2nd century. So if this gospel, if this little, conversation between Jesus and Nathaniel were actually written anytime after about 150, then we would know that there's almost no chance it didn't know John's Gospel, because everybody knew it. In the Christian churches, everyone knew it by then. So then the third reason is that if you just look at the Berlin text as a midrashic, interpretation or an expansion upon the content of John's Gospel, then that sufficiently explains the textual differences, because the author would just be taking the basic story and then adding more didactic material to it in order to expand the meaning of what is going on. So in any case, that's my argument, and I hope you enjoyed it, and these are my sources right here. And I look forward to presenting the next time, so I wish you well. Bye.